What's that?
We could maybe talk about helping loved ones with anxiety and depression.
Well, I mean, that's interesting, isn't it? It's like, so if you're asking me, how do I help my loved ones play music? That's a good point, isn't it? If you ask me, how do I help my loved one learn music? How would I help my loved one learn music? The obvious answer is I have to learn music first. So how will I help my loved one be about depression and anxiety? Because I have to learn about mine first. It's sort of like a cheap answer. It feels like sort of a trick answer, but actually it's a literal answer. Because if I don't know my mind, I don't know the wisdom wing, if I don't know how to put myself together, if I can't navigate my own dramas, if I don't know the difference between attachment and anger and love and compassion, then I can't help a fly. So that's, I mean, it's not a helpful answer, but it's the answer. So maybe what we can talk about, given that, is how do we, this is the Buddhist view, this is the wisdom wing, this is the nuts and bolts of Buddhist practice that we've got to do on ourselves first. We have to learn in our own mind to distinguish between the neuroses and the virtues. And this is something I always keep saying, but we have to hear this. We know the words love, compassion, attachment, everybody knows them, but the Buddha's analysis of them is quite profoundly different, you know? Like I could talk to many times. If you've heard me before, you've heard it all the time. And I keep saying it, and I have to say it because I have to learn it too. Is Buddha's view of the mind, this model of the mind is really quite distinctive, you know? Everything that goes on in our mind, we have 1,000 thoughts a second. Even Western psychology says that, and Buddha would totally agree. From the second we wake up in the morning till the second we go to sleep, our mind is full of thoughts and feelings and emotions, okay? And we only notice them when they're shouting out, isn't it? We only notice them when you want to kill somebody, or you only notice them when you're having hyperventilating with anxiety, or you only notice it when you're inert in bed because you can't get up because of depression. But this is the job to be done. But to help other people, and this is the one that drives us. Many people become Buddhists because they love the teachings about compassion. But as His Holiness says, as the Dalai Lama says, you know, compassion is not enough. You've got to have wisdom. And that's something that we really don't understand. It takes a while to really understand this. I remember at a conference, there's a conference in Sydney, one of those happiness conferences. And it was a little bit of a panel, and I was on a panel, and there were a bunch of people all talking about happiness, and all the different wonderful people, wonderful human beings, all their own methods, you know. And then everyone was talking about how they agreed. I made a point that, you know, in order to help others, you've got to do first work on yourself. So what people interpreted me saying was, in order to help others, if you're working in the helping professions, you've got to have time for yourself. That means you've got to relax. You've got to look after yourself. You've got to have a massage. You've got to have a good sleep. That's not what I'm saying. That's not what Buddhism's saying. Nothing wrong with that. Have a massage, have a sleep. We're not like the great yogis who can meditate day and night, you know. But what it means is we have to learn. This is not, we don't have method. We don't talk like this in our culture. We don't have methods to learn ourselves to be more content and more happy. We think happiness and contentment comes if you take care of yourself. No, it doesn't. What it means in Buddhism is you've got to learn to know your mind. You've got to be your own therapist, as Lama Yeshe says. You've got to recognize aversion. You've got to recognize attachment. You've got to recognize your own anxiety. And the words are simple, but it really takes time, you know. It takes a really long time because we don't think like that, you know. And then, we do, but then our main analysis in our culture, if you're feeling a lot of anxiety, let's say, or you're feeling a lot of anger, and you might go to a therapist. Nothing wrong with that. There are amazing therapists around. But what we tend to look into the past and find out what events happened that triggered that jealousy, that trigger the anxiety. What are you doing wrong now? You're working too hard. There's too much stress. Your husband's a bit unkind. We always look at the event. Now, there's nothing wrong with that. Buddhism would agree the events play a role. It's evident. We live in this busy world. Everything out there plays a massive role. But the hardest part to hear, the words are simple, but it's extremely hard to hear it, not to mention practice it, is that they're merely the events. They're just the catalysts. This is the central point that Buddha's making from A to Z on the entire Buddhist path. That the problem is in the mind, not in the event. This seems almost quite cruel. When you've got a mean husband, when you've got a kid who's making you insane, when you can't get a job, when you're sick, it seems cruel and unkind to say the problem is your mind. But it's very hard for us to hear this. But this is the essence of Buddhist practice, and we hear it properly. Yeah, that's the essence of Buddhist practice. That we have to change our mind. Of course, most of us are overwhelmed by our external situations. So at the least we should get out of the situation if we have to. If we can change it, we should try and change it. If the husband is too much to bear, we should leave him. This sounds ridiculous to us because we just go about like a moth to a flame until one day he kills you or you kill him. But we've got to have some kind of self-respect. If we can't handle that job, if we can't handle that husband, it is intelligent to leave. But most of us are so paralyzed, we can't even make that decision, Oh, no, I can't leave him. No, I shouldn't do that. No, it's not good. No, I shouldn't. The world, nobody would approve. Or he really does love me. Again, he whacks you. Oh, he does really love me. So we're not very realistic. We're not very courageous, So not only, or you hate your job. The boss is awful. And he's awful. I agree. He's awful. Mean. Doesn't pay you properly. Your colleagues are unkind. But then someone suggests you should leave the job. No, I couldn't do that. I'll never get another job. No, not possible. Well, then if you're going to choose to stay in the job, then maybe you've got to change your mind. You've got to try and find a way to see something good about the job. No, it's not possible. It is an ugly job. It's impossible. So we kind of, it's a no-win. You can't change the job and you won't change your mind about it. So we stay paralyzed. So our first work is to have this courage to work on our own minds. This is really like the retreat mode. The best way to do this is give up sex, drugs, and rock and roll, go to the mountains and get some realizations. That's the quickest way to do this one. Most of us won't do that. That's why you have to have some kind of space, some kind of meditation every day, some kind of discipline. And we have to first discipline our body, discipline our speech, and then we start to look into our mind. And the miraculous job of being a Buddhist, this is the actual job of being a Buddhist, is be able to distinguish between attachment and love, anxiety, depression, or calmness, or anger and compassion. There are the positive qualities and there are the negative ones. We don't like this. In our culture, it sounds like moralistic, No, it's technical. This is a technical distinction. It's a really precise kind of view the Buddhist view's got. And it's coming from these amazing Hindus before the Buddha. They map the mind, So the job of distinguishing your attachment and your anger from the positive qualities, it sounds easy, but we only notice them, like I said, when it's vomiting out your mouth, then it's a bit late. So if you can't do this job, if you can't work out your own mind and don't know what your attachment is and don't know what your depression is, or, to be able to analyze the conceptual stories, because that's the real job, then it's not possible to help anybody else. Because put it this way, if I'm still, let's say, my boyfriend or, my partner gets depressed, my mother gets depressed, whoever it is, someone you're attached to. So this is the point. So if I've got attachment, which is this hunger in me to get the nice things, we've all got it. So naturally, if my partner gets depressed all the time or gets angry all the time, then my attachment is very unhappy. That's why I'm unhappy. I think I'm unhappy because my partner gets angry. No, you're unhappy because your attachment isn't getting what it wants. And that means you have aversion to it. Now, you mightn't be an angry person. You mightn't shout and yell, but your aversion arises whenever your husband gets angry, and it might even be angry with you, or whenever your husband gets depressed, let's say, or whether your brother, like he's an alcoholic. As soon as a person you are attached to has a problem, then your attachment pollutes your compassion. That's why you get unhappy. We think we get unhappy because our brother's an alcoholic. We think we're unhappy because we've got compassion for our brother. You can't possibly suffer from compassion. Compassion is a positive state of mind. It's empathetic and it's stable and it's reasonable. We suffer because we've got attachment and because we've got aversion and we've got depression. That's what drags us down. So how do I help my depressed brother? How do I help my anxious mother? I have to be able to see them objectively first and not get my own self caught up in their drama, which is how we do, because we love each other as well, So then what happens is, let's say it's, your brother always gets depressed. First of all, you've got all this empathy for him. You've got this compassion for him. You can see his suffering. But we talk about him behind his back. We worry about him. And we think that's called compassion. That's not called compassion. That's called your anxiety and your attachment and your aversion. This sounds kind of brutal, because in our culture, we give equal status to all these different states of mind as being a normal part of a normal person. But if we take the Buddhist teachings really literally, and it's hard to do that because they all sound so sweet and cute, is a major distinction between the neurotic states of mind and the positive states of mind, you know. I mean, the number of people who come to classes, I know we have proper classes, but the same on here. What do I do about my 15-year-old daughter? She's throwing chairs at me, you know. So if you're angry and if you're attached and you're anxious about it, you just drag each other down to hell. You can't help her. So the only way to be able to help another person with their mind is by you first knowing your mind. Then it's like you've got to know your own mind first. You've got to know your own mind first. So otherwise your compassion will be just polluted by and dragged down by your attachment. I mean, that's why it's so hard being a parent. I can't imagine being a parent. I mean, I always say my children, if I had a husband or children, they'd be dead if I had them. So just as well I'm a nun. But I can't imagine the patience you have to practice every day and the wisdom you need to see someone's mind. I mean, you're so attached to your own child, and what is attachment? Attachment makes the child look like they're divine. And you've got a responsibility, that's valid. You've got love for them, that's incredible. You have compassion for your child, that's incredible. But it's dragged. If you're unable to cope with your child, it's because of your own attachment and your own anger, not because of their attachment and not because of their anger. Because if you were wise and had worked on your own mind, they wouldn't upset you. You'd be ahead of the game. You wouldn't get manipulated. You wouldn't get kind of dragged down by them. I mean, this is just, this is really profound. So if you don't do work on your own mind first, if you don't know your own attachment and your own aversion, if you don't have a proper daily practice and discipline your body and speech, I mean, the major one with speech with our children, because children will do everything imaginable to hook us and make us completely crazy, So to have the wisdom to see your child's mind and you know their mind because you know more your mind. And this is Buddha's model, not the Western model. That's what wisdom is. Wisdom comes from knowing your own mind and lessening your own neuroses. And that's what daily practice is. So you can only, and to that degree, you can only have that much compassion. This is the answer. So the answer is keep working on your own mind. And the other thing is, because we've all got attachment to a person who you're close to, like your child or your husband, attachment wants everything to be lovely. Yes, you love them. Love is, may you be happy. Love is valid and reasonable and in sync with reality. When you got love, you got a sense of interdependence with the other person. When you got compassion, that's a valid state of mind. It's empathy with their suffering. But the delusions are I-based, completely neurotic, completely fear-based, and are blind as bats. So they pollute our love and pollute our compassion, and we get hooked by all their drama, and then we blame them. So often what happens when a person comes to you with their problem, or your husband or your child, attachment kind of makes us stick our nose in where it doesn't belong. And we kind of have this sense, of thinking we have to solve their problem. Well, sometimes the best way to help somebody is just be loving, be kind. And if your child's having a tantrum, just give them a hug. Don't give them advice. They might come to you and what do I do? What do I do? Sometimes you just say, sweetheart, you've got enough wisdom. I trust your wisdom. You're watching them like a hawk. You never not watch them, but you don't try to answer their problems all the time. You don't try to to compensate. I mean, I can see this with my mother. We had a typically dysfunctional family, normal world. Everybody's got a dysfunctional family. My darling daddy was a bit naughty and did things that daddy shouldn't do. He had 6 daughters and a son. He wasn't very good at raising money and earning money. He spent it. He was a bit of an alcoholic. My poor mum had to teach all the music students. Then she had to go into the printing business, and my father started to keep running it and pay all the school bills. She sent us to the fanciest Catholic convents. I always joke that she probably still owes the bills 65 years later. So it's kind of pretty chaotic all the time, chaotic. Now I forgot the reason I said this. I'm wandering off. What did I say? What was I just saying? Oh yeah, my mother. Okay, my mother. So she was an incredible mother. I love my mother to death. I mean, I was so mean to her, but I love my mother. She never stopped trying. Her 7 children, getting the money, teaching all the music students, running the printing company, sending us to the best convents, getting us up at 5 in the morning. We had sometimes no money. We had to eat fat scones for lunch. We felt so embarrassed. All the fancy girls who lived in the fancy suburbs, they brought their fancy lunches. We had to bring fat scones, was all we had. Somehow she worked unbelievably hard. But because my father wasn't so cool, there was always dramas and fights in the family. And I sensed this all the time, that my mother would always overcompensate. She was always protecting me. I mean, all of us, but I remember me. So I remember one time she did my homework for me. And she wrote some words in this poem I had to write. And she wrote a word that I didn't understand. And the teacher knew I didn't. So I had egg on my face, but that's not helpful. That's attachment. That was attachment. She overcompensated all the time. My father was very bad in many ways, but I always knew he had more wisdom. He used to say, when she'd always compensate for me, always pick me up when she should have allowed me to, my father would say, she's got to learn from her own experience. And I would listen and I'd try to understand what he meant. I knew he was right, but because he had more wisdom, my mother. He was naughty in many other ways, but he had a lot of wisdom. And he looked like he didn't care, but he didn't intervene when it wasn't appropriate. He allowed you to fall down and learn from your own mistakes. That's the worst thing that parents don't do. They compensate for their children the whole time, and that's because of attachment. So you can't help a person. And I always had this feeling, I didn't know the words then, that my mother, I wanted her to be more firm with me. I wanted her to be more strict. I needed guidelines, but she never gave them. She was like a cushion. And I was, she was loving, but I didn't learn enough about my mind. She didn't help me learn. I didn't learn from my own experience. I didn't know I tried to understand what it meant. That's because of attachment. So you can't help anybody when you're driven by attachment. Because attachment makes you feel like you're responsible. That's why mothers have guilt. They're so guilty. My mother had this appalling guilt. And I remember one time, talking, and I was screaming at her because the guilt she had, like she felt that she was responsible for all the suffering in the family. I mean, I remember telling her, I don't want to say the 4-letter words here, but I screamed at her, excuse me, Mum, I played some role in my life, back off. You are not responsible for every mistake. It's almost like arrogance, that's what guilt does. Oh, I'm such a bad mother. Everything I did was bad. It was not her fault. My father played a role. We all played a role. It was like 7 human beings all playing our role in this interdependent relationship. But when there's attachment, you over-exaggerate your role. And that's what mothers do. They own the child as if it's theirs. So they think it's their job to make it all perfect. And when things go wrong, they think it's all their fault. No, it is not all your fault. Don't be so arrogant. That's because of guilt, which is a delusion, and all delusions exaggerate. So this is this minefield, to identify the attachment, identify the anger, identify your own anxiety. My mother she worried her whole life. That's anxiety. She never stopped worrying. And that's what parents do to children, and making the child feel guilty, like, oh, I'm worried about you. Well, that's your problem, Mum. Bugger off, Excuse me. So this is the minefield, because we can't tell the difference between the neuroses and the virtues, because we assume, oh, it's normal to be attached to your child. Well, of course it is, but it's causing you suffering, baby. So we get no wisdom. So sometimes you just leave the person alone. You watch them, you love them for who they are, you don't answer all their questions, you allow them to fall down, you let them learn from their own experience. And also the trouble is, for the person you adore, let's say your brother's got alcoholic, your attachment over-exaggerates his suffering. I mean, he's doing what he has to do, but we end up patronizing somebody. Oh, the poor thing, you talk about him behind his back, and then you stick your nose in, bullying him to go to AA, and he's not ready to go to AA yet. And then he stops going. Then you get mad at him. You talk about him behind his back. You all gossip about him. That's your problem. Back off and leave your brother alone, Love him for who he is. Be respectful to him. Talk to the better part of your brother. Don't talk to the alcoholic part. That's a really powerful way to put it. So see your person who's got anxiety. Well, look at your own. That's because of attachment, always worried about things. But don't own it. Don't think it's yours. And don't try to solve it. Just love them. Be like a rock of Gibraltar for them, so they know that you're there when they need you. Just love them for who they are, and don't always talk to the anxiety part of the person. Talk to the better part of the person. Your brother who's an alcoholic, he is an alcoholic, but remember the brother you loved. Remember the good qualities in him. This is the point about delusions. All the delusions, attachment and anger and jealousy and anxiety and pride and depression, they exaggerate. So when you have an attachment to your child, it's like your possession. You own them. You made them, you think, in the West, you own them. They're your responsibility. That is true. That's love. But we exaggerate it with attachment. So then you think you're supposed to solve all their problems. No, you're not. You're giving them the tools so they can solve their own problems, so they can learn from their own experience. Your alcoholic brother, don't just see the alcoholic. He's more than an alcoholic. He's got the same qualities that you loved about him when he was a kid. So talk to the better part of your brother. Talk to the better part of your anxious sister. Talk to the better part of your depressed mother. Because, you know, when my mother would be depressed, because, I mean, all the dramas she had with my father, we'd all feel guilty like children. We'd feel guilty as well, you know. We'd panic. As children, of course, it's hard not to. But it's to learn to distinguish in our own mess, in this chaos in here, to distinguish between the attachment voices and the anger voice and the jealousy one. But it's hard work, because if you haven't studied Buddha's model of the mind, you can't just make up what you think attachment is. Buddha's got a very specific view. And even once we've learned it theoretically, it's hard to still see it, you know, because we're so addicted. I mean, Charmaine and I had this conversation. She's a therapist, okay? She meets patients. She's a Buddhist. She's learned she's a Buddhist, and she's a serious Buddhist. But when she talks, you know, we've been talking about this. I say, well, okay, give me the Buddhist analysis. Give me the Buddhist now. What are the delusions in that person's mind? She talks about, you know, not her clients, but we talk about things. Because we talk about in the West, well, they've got OCD, they've got this, and they've got ADID and HDHD and bipolar and all these names. There's nothing wrong with them. It's a particular model. But I say, let's look at the Buddhist analysis. There's only so many delusions. Which one is it? Attachment, aversion. It almost seems too simplistic for us, because we make it so complex in Western psychology, incredibly complex, you know. It almost seems too simple, the Buddhist one. But if this model of the mind is enough to completely enable you to realize emptiness and achieve Buddhahood, my goodness, it must be a valid model. It must work. Buddha's got no separate tools he kept secret behind that he didn't give us. But we're not used to applying the Buddhist model, you know. Sort of Buddhism's over here, and that's religion, and this is real psychology over here. That's demented, you know. Buddhism either works or it doesn't. But it means seeing your own mind. And that's not an easy job, you know. Identifying what's the thought, what's the delusion, is it a virtue, is it a delusion? It's really hard to distinguish. I mean, attachment and love, when we do the compassion teachings, how to develop compassion. There's a series of techniques you go through, you know, meditations. And the very first one is what's called equanimity. This is very profound. Cultivating equanimity. And what they mean here very specifically is the very first step. This equanimity is this clear, heartfelt recognition that enemy, friend, and stranger, and there's only 3 categories of sentient beings in this universe. There's no 4th category. There are the objects of attachment, objects of aversion, objects of indifference. That's it, only 3. All beings on the planet will fit in those 3. So what equanimity is, it's like the foundation of the beginnings of developing love and compassion and great compassion and culminating in bodhicitta. Equanimity is this very specific state of mind. And what it is this, as like I said, this heartfelt recognition that friend, enemy, and stranger, from their point of view, are equal to each other from one point of view. They each want to be happy. They each do not want to suffer. So already this is even too hard to hear, because what's the implication of this, you know? But we'll get there. But the point is this: you do this analysis, you do this logical, you use logic in your meditation to argue with ego's misconceptions, to distinguish between. So for example, right now we do have love and compassion. And whom do we love? Whom do we have compassion for? The objects of our attachment. So that's why we can practically conflate love and attachment. But if we see them, they're like, British say, and the Australians say, they're like chalk and cheese. They seem identical, but they are profoundly and totally different. And this is again pointing to the unique approach in Buddhist psychology that refers to these neurotic, I-based, fear-based, self-centered, demented, delusional states of mind, which we think are normal, and the positive, valid, reasonable, appropriate states of mind. This is the way Buddhism describes, and it's not how we think. So attachment, you know, when we understand what attachment is, it's the main voice of ego grasping. It's the main voice of this misconception about the very status of our own self. It's the ego grasping, this colloquial term that's used to refer to the deepest delusion the most primordial, the misconception of a self that causes us to have this constant fear. So we're just on the edge of it all the time. That is a sense of a separate self, lonely, bereft, separate, concrete, set in stone. It's so primordial. We don't even have an equivalent in modern psychology. This is the root delusion. On the basis of this, the main voice of that delusion is this main one, effectively, according to the Four Noble Truths, the one that's the main source of our suffering in day-to-day life, and that's attachment. As Amma said, I can tell you about this for a whole year. We'll never begin to comprehend it until we start working deeply inside. It's multifaceted. Its most primordial energy is dissatisfaction. We call it self-hate in our culture. We're very good at it. We're never satisfied. We're like this bottomless pit of dissatisfaction. So naturally, that's the most primordial energy of attachment, and everybody's got it. Then that gives rise to the next level of attachment, which is this emotional hunger, this searching for something out there to fill up the gaping hole that'll give us satisfaction. This drives most of our decisions in most of daily life. It sounds almost too shocking to hear it like this, but it's so subtle, so continuous. And then when it doesn't get what it wants, that's aversion. And that's got a spectrum as well. So attachment is dissatisfaction, emotional hunger, constant craving, manipulating and controlling, control freak, that's attachment. Controlling to get what you want. Why? Because when you get what you want, it'll bring satisfaction. That's the assumption. And then aversion is what arises the millisecond it doesn't get what it wants. And that's got a whole spectrum. Volatile anger, irritation, annoyance, frustration, fear, despair and depression. They're all a manifestation of aversion. So quiet people have depression. I've never had depression, I promise. It's volatile, shouts and yells, So they're both the same problem. They're both our thwarted attachment. But if you're a quiet person, you don't notice yours because it just comes at the level of kind of annoyed, upset. So you don't pay attention to upset and annoyed. Who cares? That's normal, we think. But that builds up and eventually becomes inert. You become inert from depression. It's built up because everything we think and do and say builds up inside. It doesn't go in one ear and out the other. It builds up. And then one day there's a straw that breaks the camel's back, So this is the thing about the Buddhist approach. If we start to pay attention, if we only pay attention when the wheels are falling off, we will never solve our problem. We'll always have mental breakdowns and kill each other and ourselves. But if we start to use these simple Buddhist tools of being aware of our own thoughts before they become emotions, that's the key. That's the skill we have to learn. And that means owning what's inside us every single day. And that's so the equanimity, we can recognize here we have attached the ones we love. Who are the objects of love? Love is a valid state of mind. It's in the positive heading. It's a thought that delights in someone else's happiness. When you see a person happy, you're happy for them. That's love. Compassion is you see a person suffer and you think, oh my goodness, I wish they didn't suffer. That's compassion. So we want to grow these limitlessly. But what's holding them back is attachment and aversion, our own junk, So at the moment, we only love those we're attached to. And when you're like, if you're in, parents are in love with their children until they want to kill them one day, but usually you're in love with your children. They look the most divine beings in the universe. And I'm just as well, my mother was attached to me. She would have bloody killed me otherwise. She always forgave me. That's because she had incredible attachment and because she did have love, yes. So we only have love for those we're attached to. And we're only attached to those we love. So we assume they go together, and they do right now go together, but that's completely false. And all we're trying to do on this Buddhist view, on the Mahayana path, is learning by discriminating between these, learn to expand the love to encompass everybody on the basis of the fact we've just proved it with equanimity. They're all equal in wishing to be happy and not suffer. But right now, the reason, according to ego, that I love you, I want you to be happy, definitely, is because you make me happy. You satisfy my attachment. So that's what happens with boyfriends. Mainly, parents won't usually stop loving their children. Some might, but you stop loving your boyfriend. When he chucks you out for a younger version, he'll now go to the enemy category. And before you met him, he was a stranger. So this is the point. Let's say, who's my boyfriend? I don't know. Where's my boyfriend? Have I got one? Somebody. I can't have Loz and Lungdrup. I better leave Loz and Dundrup alone. He doesn't want a girlfriend.
I'll be your boyfriend.
You'll be my which one? Your boy. Ming, okay, darling. Let's say Ming is my boyfriend. She's a girl. I can't tell the difference. Doesn't matter. So let's say when he's a stranger, I don't care. He might have, Ming might get headaches. He might have migraines. And I've never met Ming before. I've heard about Ming. He lives down the road at number 6. Oh, does he get headaches? Oh, the poor thing. And I'll try and be polite. But 2 minutes later, I've forgotten about Ming. I couldn't care less because he's a stranger, isn't it? Now, suddenly, let's say I meet Ming and we fall in love and he moves me into number 6. Now, he's now gone to the friend category. And how do I feel about him now? I think about him day and night. Suddenly people say, Robina, so compassionate. She paid all this money paying for Ming and looking after, so kind, so compassionate, so loving. Yeah, of course. Because now Ming does what my attachment wants. I mean, it's embarrassing to admit how self-centered we are, but this is the universe, people. Monkeys and dogs and humans are like this. And then, of course, when Ming gives me up for a younger version, now he's in the enemy category. And I hope he suffers from his migraines. So the point about enemy, friend, stranger here, and this is, is that if you check when Ming was my enemy, how do your headaches feel? Terrible. You check with Ming when he's my boyfriend, how do your headaches feel? Terrible. And when he's my enemy, how do your headaches feel? Terrible. So enemy, friend, and stranger has got nothing to do with me, but I dump my own projections onto them, and I define the entire universe in terms of friend, enemy, stranger, purely in terms of whether they fulfill my needs or not. I mean, we should be embarrassed at how self-centered it is, but it's normal world. Everybody's like this. So we have to distinguish in attachment and love. So yes, love your daughter. My mother loved me. I never doubted for 1 second she had love for all her children, all 7 of us. Never stopped until the day she died. I knew she thought about every one of us until the day she died. That I'm certain about. But why she got depressed, why she got angry, why she became despairing when my daddy was naughty, and why she'd get upset about her children, think about them all the time and worry about them, that was because of her attachment. Of course, we call it normal. We're all normal. But all Buddha's saying is, I found a method to get rid of this so-called normal stuff. So you stop suffering. It's a miracle. It's miraculous. It's powerful. But we just have to hear it properly and know we can learn to navigate all that. And then you can have incredible love and incredible compassion and be a really wise partner and not jump yourself onto their problem and act like it's your problem. And then like my mother, feel guilty when everything went wrong. It's all my fault, she would say. I mean, I'd be infuriated with her. No, Mum, I played some role in my life. Back off. It's a really interesting point. Guilt is very wicked. It looks so noble, guilt, like this poor thing. No, it's awful. It's wicked. It's insulting somebody. And even when you say, oh, that poor brother is so full of, look at him, he's suffering so much, my poor brother. Don't be so insulting to him. My friend's in prison, the same. People get all excited, want to help people in prison. But then they get after 6 months, they give it up because you just can't be bothered. Because in the beginning, it was all attachment. All these poor people in prison. Don't be so rude. Who do you think you are? Don't be so insulting. They're proper human beings with a life. So respect them for who they are. And then I walk out that prison. I don't worry about it. That's their life, not mine. I'm not on death row, but I can give them tools when I'm there, but to patronize them, the poor thing on death row. No, it's his life, it's his karma. Mitchell has accepted, it's his reality. So we can crack jokes together. Then I walk out the door, I don't bring the junk with me. And that's why we bring all the junk with us, because we have attachment and anger and depression and all the other rubbish. So we work on that, then we become more qualified to help other people. We become more skillful at helping other people because we've got our own rubbish out of the way. Of course, it's a hard job, but this is being a Buddhist. This is what Buddha's saying. We mightn't hear it like this. We think being a Buddhist is walking around looking holy, being mindful. Excuse me. Forget that. It's cliched nonsense. Anyway, I know there's a long answer. I'm only time to go home. Any more questions there?
Hi, Venerable Robina.
Who, Petal? Who's talking to me?
Ming, your boyfriend.
Okay, darling. Talk to me, Ming. What are you saying?
I have a question, about righteous indignation, because some scientists...
Indignation.
Yeah. Some scientists say that they see monkeys that they've fed, for example, one monkey a bunch of cucumbers, and then the other monkey sees it and is like, what the heck? And will stop eating, like completely.
I don't understand what you're telling me. What are you talking about?
Like, I think what I'm trying to tie it into is the fact that there are people not wanting to wear masks. And
Okay, so
so,
what's the question? Cut to the chase. What's the
okay,
question?
that is righteous indignation a
It's a polite
delusion?
word for anger, honey.
Okay, so it's basically a delusion.
Well, I mean, give me a scenario. So you see a person who's on the street who should have a thing and a mask.
I'll give you a straight up forward one.
Okay.
Let's say I have a therapist and she goes off for Thanksgiving and parties and everything
Right.
and potentially gives someone
Okay. So
COVID.
what's your problem? So what's your problem with that?
My problem is I have aversion to the fact that she potentially got
Yeah.
people ill
You're
and
angry. You're angry with
she's
her.
giving
You're
me
angry.
advice.
Okay. You might be able to point out the fact that she's doing something wrong. That's a fact. You can prove that a person, if you see another person punch somebody, you can say they did punch them. That's a fact. So this therapist person, whoever it is, goes off and is doing things that are irresponsible. You might be able to prove that as a fact. That's one thing. Now, the second thing is your opinion about it. And that's where the problem comes. So because, that's what people by being righteous, because you see one person kick a dog, you think I'm allowed to be angry with that person. No, anger just makes a mess. It's not a question of being moralistic. I'm allowed to be angry or not. Anger just distresses your mind, makes you upset, and blinds you to see things that are. So there are the whole world is full of people doing bad things. Have you noticed, Ming? The whole world is full of garbage dump people doing garbage
Absolutely.
dump things. So
But
then,
if I'm relying on someone for getting well,
excuse me,
there's
dear,
one
bloody will
thing.
give her up. Who says you've got to choose her? God in
Yeah.
heaven. You're criticizing her and you keep going back for her advice. Kindly make a decision. If you don't like the way she behaves, find a new therapist. Give me.
Okay.
Excuse
Thanks.
me for touching. Are
That
you
was
seeing
an awesome answer. Thank you.
That's the main point, darling. Leave it there, recognize her behavior, think this is not so cool, she's trying to help me, and you're not got enough confidence, leave her there, don't have an opinion, and choose another therapist. But we don't need, you see, we think we have to have opinions about everybody. We run around having opinions about the whole universe, and half the time it's attachment and anger. So we don't have to do that, Ming. See the fact, the world, the way the world, I remember Martin Luther King said, it's good to find fault. It's good to see, look at the racism, look at the bad behavior, look at the terrible politics, look at the suffering of the world. That's good. That's not anger. But then you say, what can I do to help? So if you can help the person, do something. If not, shut your mouth. In other words, anger is like on top of the fact that something is wrong. Racism is there, sexism is there, suffering is there, people not wearing masks, people doing bad things. That's the universe, Ming. But we assume we have a right to be angry. That's why you use the term righteous indignation. No, it's giving yourself permission to be angry. But the point is, if you look at your mind, all the anger does is disturb you. All it does is make you upset. And then in the end, there's no solution. So it's for your own benefit is the point, to not be angry. But seeing facts, that's not denied. But trouble is we conflate the anger with finding fault. No, they're separate things. Are you seeing my point? Do you get what I mean by that?
Yes. So I could also work on my anger and just let it go.
Well, I'm saying more than that. So tell me what you've learned from what I just said. Give me the summary of what you're getting from the advice I'm just giving. What is the summary?
To work on not being triggered by.
What I'm saying is, Ming, have you noticed in the world lots of people do bad things? Have you noticed that?
Yeah.
That's a fact, isn't it? Bad things happen, don't they? So the example you're giving is one person who goes off and doesn't look like she's taking care of people. So that could be a fact. What I'm trying to get at, Ming, listen to my point. We've got to establish facts first. The fact is your brother's an alcoholic. The fact is that person killed somebody. The fact is that politician looks like he's stealing. You've got to establish facts first. But then what we assume is, because they're bad, we assume I'm allowed to be angry. We think they're the same thing. But one is see the facts. And then two, if you can fix it, fix it. If not, mind your own business. This is not just ignoring. If you can do something to help, that becomes compassion. So in this case you've just used, you've observed a person's behavior, especially if you're a therapist, then you just leave it there and think, okay, she's that way. I'm not so sure I need her to help me anymore. But there's no benefit in getting angry or upset. I mean, it's easy to say these words, but this is the point.
I think I got it. Yeah.
Good, darling. Keep moving.
Yeah. Thank
What
you.
else? Good, darling. Thanks. Charmaine, what else?
There's a question in the chat from Chuck. He says, how does one practice empathy without attachment?
That's the job, Chuck. By giving up by working on your mind, doing the wisdom wing first. I'm not trying to be cheap and nasty. Do the wisdom wing first, Chuck. If you don't know what attachment is, then you won't know the difference. We have to learn to recognize our own attachment. So empathy with others is necessarily, you have empathy with your child, or let's say your beloved. You have compassion for a beloved. It's easy to have compassion for your beloved because you've got attachment and you can't bear and you think about them all the time. But if it's a stranger, it's very hard to have compassion for a stranger. For 5 minutes we might, but we get exhausted after a while. We don't know what to do with that because they're not involved in our life. So the point is, that's why we've got to see people outside of attachment. Get your attachment glasses off and see there's a person there who's a friend, there's a person who's a stranger, there's a person who's an enemy. Get your own anger glasses off, get your indifference glasses off, get your attachment glasses off, and you train in this, and you get to see those three people aren't just existing in terms of whether they satisfy your needs or not, which is how we see the universe now. We don't even think we do this, but it's so true. So get yourself out of the equation and then simply look at these three people and observe they've all got a headache, So if your stranger's got a headache and your husband's got a headache, or your brother's got a headache, your beloved and your enemy's got a headache, they all feel the same, but you can't see that unless you remove the attachment. It's seeing them not as extensions of your own needs, which is how we do now. We see the whole world in terms of whether they satisfy our needs or not. The ones who don't are called enemies. The ones who do are called friends. And the ones who do neither, they could all drop dead. We don't care about them, So this is a really good analysis to do. When you know your headache, when you know what your headache is like, then that is a really sound basis. So when you know your anger and you know your depression, then you can empathize with others. That's always the wisdom wing has to come first. It's sort of obvious when a person's been an alcoholic themselves and pick themselves up, they're the ones who have compassion for other alcoholics because they know exactly what they feel. And that's what the wisdom wing, that's the emphasis of the wisdom wing. You know your own mind first. You know your own depression. You know your own anger. Then you can recognize others and then you can have compassion. But if you're an angry person, you're angry people, I'm an angry type person, right? You can see my personality. It's angry people who can't stand me. Patient people think I'm funny. That's why I think Jamie must be patient. You are, I think. You're a patient guy. They think I'm funny, but angry people cannot stand the sight of me. One person who came to one teaching, maybe at Vajrapani, a couple of years ago, he said, he wrote a letter, he would never come again if they invited me, that I was mentally ill. I had no empathy. Other things he said, you can't imagine. So all I can deduce is he must be a very angry guy, because my anger reflected his. It has to be. This is how we are. It's very powerful. You've got a problem in your mind. Angry people can't stand other angry people. It's natural because it reflects back to yours. This is really a good way to see your own mind, how you respond to a certain person. It's very powerful. What else? That helpful, Chuck?
Yes, absolutely.
Good, Chuck. Thank you. What else?
We have another question, Venerable Robina.
What?
This one is from one. He said, after 10 years of marriage, I'm always angry at my wife. And having compassion for her. I'm afraid love is over. What can I do?
Love is over. Juan, I don't know where you are, darling, but my God. You got two choices. It comes down to it, Juan. There are two choices. And both are difficult. It's just like saying you can't stand your job anymore. I can't stand the boss. What am I going to do? There are two choices. When it comes to it, there are two choices precisely. The first choice is, but you've already sort of answered it, you check this relationship and you see, your first choice is this, that you see there must be something worthwhile here. And then and if you do decide that, you have to decide that first. and it seems like that you've already decided not to do that, but let's say you do that, there's something worthwhile, then you've made that decision. And then within that decision, that to stay with that person, you then will work on your mind and learn to be compassionate, learn to give up anger, learn to give up attachment, that is a really hard job to do. Now, the other part is, or the other option is, it is over. And the thing is, there's nothing wrong with a relationship being over. You know, in Christianity, in our Christian culture, we were so locked into the view that somehow marriage is forever. And we have all this guilt about getting divorced, and what will the world think, and what will they think, what will my mother think? And we're terrified of making that decision, or because we feel so insecure. So we stay stuck in a nightmarish relationship, and we can't change our mind, and we also can't change the relationship. So you've got to decide, you stay in the relationship and you make the most of it. And actually the mind is very capable. You could even learn to love her again. That's possible, but you don't have to force yourself. If you really think it's over, then you have to leave her. That's it. You have to decide that. But that sometimes is even more terrifying for some people, because you're afraid what people think. You're afraid of upsetting her. You're afraid of what the kids think. You're afraid of what your parents think. You're afraid of what society thinks. And so you become paralyzed. But in the end, you only have two choices. This is very brutal, but it's very clear. You change your mind, or you change your situation. That's it. That's it. So make a decision to at least decide, which one can I do? Because you can't stay in that relationship but keep being angry. You will kill her one day. Or you'll be like most people who live in bitterness and misery, living in the same bed. When I hear about people who live in relationships like that, they spend the 30, 40 years even sleeping in the same bed, hating each other. That to me is the worst insanity I have ever heard. I'd rather go to prison than do that, you know. But that's how many people live their lives. It is beyond unbelievably shocking. That's the nightmare, because we're full of fear. Many people, women, classically often women. I remember listening to Oprah recently, and I mentioned this. She said that the commonest thing that women say about their relationship, saying like what you're saying, oh, well, what I've got is better than nothing. So you just stay there in misery, angry, bitter, depressed, resentful. This is like hell on earth. How anybody could live like this. But this is the tragedy in our culture. It shows how disconnected we are from our own feelings. We're just living this kind of insane external life, pretending to be married to somebody, pretending to have a relationship, but in fact you loathe each other. How can you do this, you know? Now, the reality is you can change your mind. You can learn to work on your mind. You could learn to love her again, because it's your thoughts that make her look horrible. Your anger is why you can't stand her, not because of her. But if you're brave enough, you can do that. That's up to you, whether you think it's worthwhile. If you can't, don't force, then you make a decision and you go. But don't go because you don't like her. Don't go because you think she's horrible. Go because you can't handle it. That's responsibility. So if you want to say something to that, I don't know, if you want to confess.
Thank you. Thank you.
When
That's very enlightening.
Did you hear what I was saying, Juan? Are you here?
Yes, I'm here.
If you are going to leave, nothing wrong, darling. It will be difficult. It'll be painful, but don't do it because, don't blame her. It's your own mind. Do you get my point, Juan?
I do.
It's pretty intense. This is why, to me, living with one person in a relationship, people think it's difficult being a nun. You people have no idea what you're talking about. It's as easy as can be. I do exactly what I like when I like. You guys live with each other. You've got children and husbands and wives. I can't imagine how difficult it is. I'm not being sarcastic here. I know when I was younger, I must have some karma to be a nun, you know, monastic karma. When I'd hear people talk about my girlfriends at school, talk about getting married, I wouldn't say anything, but I'd have like a panic attack in my mind. How could people live in the same bed as another person? I know it sounds like I'm demented, autistic or something. Because even when I had relationships, that was so, I'm pretty intense, you can see. The drama and the guilt and the anger, not the guilt, I never had guilt, jealousy and the anger and the attachment and the fear of losing the person. I thought, this is insane. I don't want that. I'd rather live on my own, you know. We're all different, okay? Whew.
Thank you.
Are you communicating, Juan?
Yes,
You be
I
brave,
understand.
and make a wise decision out of kindness.
Yeah, the children is what makes it difficult, you know, and complex.
No, and now you've added the problem to it. Of course, this is the tragedy, isn't it? So this is a whole nother discussion, Juan. How many children?
3,
How old are they?
6, 4, and 2.
Oh, sweetheart. One, this is so difficult. Are you,
Yes.
okay, let me ask you a question. You look like a good man. You look like you've got a good heart. Do you think you are capable of changing your mind? And do you know what I
Yes.
mean by that?
I think I am. I think I am.
Well, if you've got patience, sweetheart, don't worry. If you've got patient mind, not an angry mind. So it seems like you've got a patient mind. Am I right? You're not
Yes.
angry?
Yes, I
But-
think I am. I think
Okay.
I do have a patient mind.
But then, you have to have the courage for your own sanity, but also for everybody else to try and change your mind. And if you can, I mean, is there any benefit in doing it together? You never think you want to? Does she love you? Does she love you?
I think she does. Yes.
She does love you.
Yes. I
So
think
what?
so. Yes.
She gets angry with you all the time, with you or with everybody? Sweetheart?
A little bit of with everyone.
Well, that means she's dissatisfied in herself, doesn't it? Do you understand that? She's not satisfied with herself. You understand that?
Exactly.
That's how we get angry.
I'm starting to. That's what I've been thinking lately. That
Good, darling. It's
she's
right.
dissatisfied with that. Yes.
But that's often the same. I mean, just recently a conversation with a friend in Mexico about his old mum. And he's staying with his mum because of the COVID-19 with other siblings. And, mum he said she's never stopping being angry. She's always dissatisfied. She's always complaining. What'll I do? And then I said, well, I asked him a few questions, similar to a discussion with you. But basically I said, your poor old mother, she's old, she's a lady, she's in Mexico. Sorry to be rude about Mexicans or wherever, but most women get no respect. She's an old mother. She just does the work. No one pays attention to her. No one thanks her. Everybody takes her for granted. That could be the same with your wife. She just sits there feeling miserable. No one's paying attention. No one's listening to her. Maybe that's it. You got to look. I don't know. So I said to this guy, just love your poor mother. Thank your mother for being so kind. You help her. And I said, do you help around the house? He said, oh, no. I said, do you pay rent? No. I mean, God in heaven. I know you're a husband, not a mother or son, but it's so typical. And most people, Juan, are not conscious of their mind, are not satisfied. So just get angry and dump it on everybody else, But if you're brave enough and you've got some kind of practice, you can do this. You can learn to work on your mind and you can learn to be compassionate and kind for everybody's sake. If you're brave enough to do that, and life passes very quickly, Juan, before you know it, the kids will be grown up and then you can do what you want to do. So if you've really got a brave mind, you can do that. That's the best solution, if you can.
It has taken a toll on my mind, and it's been hard because I have been falling into depression because of all the dissatisfaction. So it's difficult, but you're right. I have to work on myself.
But do you have a communication with her at all? You don't talk to each other?
We do.
Do you talk about these things?
Not really. No.
Do you have a therapist you go to, or you have a Buddhist practice, or what?
We do meditation. We do yoga.
Both of you. Both of you.
Yes, both of us.
Really, Juan, the thing is, you can't solve her problems. You've got to look at your own mind first. You've got to find methods to help your own mind, Juan, to be clear, and then really clear what you want, and then it'll give you the courage to try and, try and change. You understand, Juan? It's not
example of what practices.
What, darling? What, sweetheart?
What example of practices that I could do?
Well, darling, that's up to you to find.
Practices?
No, I'm talking about if you like the Buddhist teachings, you've got to read the teachings and think about it. All the things I'm talking about here. That's up to you. There's no magic practices to do, but it means having a daily practice. You said you've got it, but the benefit of a practice isn't just to sit there being holy for 20 minutes, is to know your own mind, to see what your problems are, to see how you can change yourself, to see how you can be more patient and more loving and more kind and more forgiving. Because you said she gets angry and the love is gone. You said that. So is it mainly her anger that upsets you, or what else?
And her dissatisfaction.
But why did she get angry? In what situations did she get angry? When did she get angry? With the children, with you, or what? Sweetheart. Juan.
With everyone. With everyone.
So she's really dissatisfied in her own mind then. She's not happy in herself. This is difficult. But honey, this is where if you work on your mind, her anger won't so much upset you. But what you've got to realize, if her anger upsets you, then her anger is making you angry. And your anger is hers and her anger is her. Your anger is yours. So we've got to learn to own our part of it. And you've got to learn to protect yourself and do something to learn to work on yourself so you can find a situation where you can be reasonable for the sake of the children. Yes. I mean, there's so many things to talk about it. 4 minutes to 6, Juan, I don't know, sweetheart.
Thank
say
you.
you
Thank
meditate. What kind of meditation do you do?
Just mindfulness,
Okay.
mindful breathing.
And you do your own, you've got your own place. You do your own meditation on your own. Huh? Juan? Sweetheart? Juan, can you hear me? Has he frozen? Has he? Juan? Juan, listen. If you want to, Juan, listen.
Only mindful breathing, but I do have some apps that help me with some guidance.
I understand, darling. So listen, why don't you, if you'd like to have a bit of a longer conversation with me, we can talk. So you email me, okay? Would you like to do that?
Okay.
My
I
name,
would love to. Thank you.
Robina Courtin, all one word, at mac.com, like the computer, at mac.com. And if you forget, ask Charmaine after the event.
Okay.
Host. You talk to me. We'll discuss it, okay? But it's good for everybody because we're all the same. We all do the same thing. Be brave though, Juan, okay? Okay, honey?
Thank you.
You talk to me.
Thank
Email
you.
me.
Thank you.
Okay.
Robina Courtin at mac.com. I'll email you.
RobinaCourtin.com,
Thank you.
exactly. That's right. Well, okay, people, that's it. Got an hour gone. If there's any benefit in anything I've said, this is Buddha's view, but this is what I'm trying to work with. I'm coming from my own experience, having confidence in this practice. We can change our minds. That's what's miraculous. Okay, so we all just have the courage to change our minds every day and learn to own our stuff and not confuse it with the other person's stuff. Get a distinction, It's very important. Otherwise, we all drown together. Okay, darlings, goodbye.
Thank you, Robina.
Now, Susie and Jamie can go to bed.
Thank you.
Okay,
Vanessa.
darling. Much love. Goodbye. Jangchub Semchog Rinpoche. Panam Chig. Kepanam Pamepa Yang Gong Ne Gong Du Felba Shog. That's it. Goodbye, darlings. Thank you so much, everybody. Bye bye.